is going to be my last one for the day. Taking a long time. But this is a big boy. Jesus is doing a whole lot in this one, so I'm going to try to condense it, but probably won't. I'll probably keep on talking and add more and more. I'm going to put this out just so you can see a little bit, so I don't look like a Smurf. I can only see part of my head because there's like right in the middle. It's like in the corner of my water bottle. Like my water bottle's here, the handle is here, and my phone is like sitting on the water bottle in the handle, and so I can't actually see myself. I can just see my shoulders and my hands. Anyways, this has nothing to do with what I'm talking about today. I'm talking about Mark 8. So I'm gonna kind of take it slow, one thing at a time, right? So this is Jesus feeding the 4,000. So the kind of talks about the fact that there was a large crowd, and the people are starving. That's the first thing. Jesus says, "I have compassion on the crowd because they've already stayed with me 3 days and have nothing to eat." Right? 3 days. We see three happen all the time. That's just something that, as of note, right? Jesus is saying, "Oh my gosh, am recognizing that these people are having a rough time, right? These people are willing to stay with me for 3 days, and they're starving." And then the next part is basically Jesus recognizes that there's a consequence. It's basically that if I send them home, they'll collapse on the way, and some of them have come a long distance. So I think this just tells you a lot about Jesus' character, right? This whole section talks about Jesus' character, and also the example of what a leader and what a Christian is willing to, of how a Christian should live, right? Because we want to be like Christ, so we got to take examples of what Christ is doing. So the first part of this, right? He has compassion. He is noticing, and especially as a leader, he's seeing that people are going through something. He's seeing that there's an issue. He's seeing that there's a problem. He's seeing that, oh my gosh, these people need help. They're like, I gotta reach out to. There's something like I feel bad because these people have been willing to sacrifice for me, and so I gotta do something for them. I can't just leave them hanging. It's not just about me. I can't just say, whatever, solve your own problem. I'm willing. I want to help them, and with that, he also is recognizing the consequences of if he does. Like he's like, I can't let them just starve and pass out. Like there's consequences for your actions, right? And so as a leader, as a Christian, you have to recognize, as any person, regardless of what your beliefs are, you have to recognize that there are consequences for your actions. And so even though it's a great thing that he's been preaching for 3 days, the one difficult part, one of the consequences is that like people be hungry. And so Jesus is like, we gotta figure something out. And the disciples also are like, then they start trying to come up with an idea, right? This is a learning moment for them. They're like, how are we going to do that? How are we going to do that, Jesus? You come up with all sorts of ways. So we got to figure something out. How are you going to do it? They're coming up with this question, this doubt, a little bit of doubt, but I think it's a legitimate question. It's like, there's 4,000 people, they're starving. How are we going to do this? And so Jesus comes up with a solution. So the people ask, where can we get enough bread to feed these many people? And disciples go, oh, well, we give 7. Again, one of God's holy numbers, and God likes numbers. He designed the world to be very specific and have very specific symbols, and Jesus is going, here we go. And so the first thing that he does, and I think I'm kind of going to like a leadership position of like, not position, but leadership is kind of the lens I'm looking through in this, and kind of who Christ is. Because if he's going to be on our throne, he's got to be a good leader, right? And so if I want to be a good leader, then I want to do what Jesus is doing. Does that make sense? I don't know. Anyways, so the first thing he does, he commands the crowd to sit down on the ground. So as a leader, right, he's saying, Jesus is saying, okay, I'm going to take care of you guys. I need you guys to sit down. Think of it as like a teacher in the class, right? The teacher is the one who's responsible. He's going, okay, you got this. But first, you guys got to chill out, and then we'll approach the problem, right? And so he commands them. He takes control, and he goes, then the first thing that he does, right, He's like, okay, how are we gonna fix this, basically? So he takes the 7 loaves and then he gives thanks, right? He's acknowledging that he's acknowledging that God is in the situation, that God gave him this opportunity, and that he believes that God is going to use it, right? And so Jesus is giving thanks. He says, "Okay, God, you got this. You've given me these 7 things, these 7 loaves, and I believe you're going to do something cool with it." Um, and so then he breaks it, right? He says, "Okay, I feel like I got to do something first, though, right?" He takes them, he gives thanks, and then he says, "I'm going to be proactive and I'm going to separate it, and then we're going to see what happens." He's willing to take that next step, right? Jesus takes that next step in showing us what trusting God is like telling us we got to be the ones who are willing to break the bread. We got to be willing to say, "Okay, I'm going to take the first little step, even though I don't know how it's going to turn out." Jesus probably knew, but exactly how it was going to go, but we did. The people in the audience did not. And then gave them to the disciples to set before the people. So Jesus is saying, "Oh, this is not a one-man show. This is not. He does throughout the Gospels. He does things with the disciples, for the disciples, and then sometimes he just does stuff by himself. Well, it's all through God the Father and the Holy Spirit. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff, but in this context, right, he's doing it. And so what he's doing is saying, okay, now that I've taken this first step, I'm going to let you guys help. I'm going to help you disciples who I'm teaching, who I'm being the mentor towards. I'm going to give this responsibility to you, and I'm going to use this as a teaching moment and an opportunity for you to grow in your faith and for the people you're serving." Because the next phrase is, "So they served them to the crowd." They served. So talking about the fact that Jesus, in doing this, is saying, we're going to serve you, and I'm going to show you disciples, not only teaching you how to do it, what you should do in these situations, but also that there is a level of servanthood that you have to have, which you have to be fully a servant when you are sharing your gospel, when you're helping other people, when you're doing anything in life. Part of life and love and living as a Christian is serving, and being a leader. If you're going to take a position of responsibility, you have to be willing to go, okay, I'm going to serve. I'm going to be part of the solution. I'm going to get my hands dirty. I'm going to go to the people. They're serving them. It's not I'm going to have some. Jesus, in addition, not only is he's serving the disciples, and therefore the disciples can serve the people. And so it's this effect, right, of like understanding kind of leadership of like, you have to be willing to serve and teach, and also being willing to delegate. That aspect of like, just because you're in charge, that doesn't mean you're out of the equation. You still have to serve and be willing to delegate, and it's actually a good thing that you're delegating responsibilities. It's not a bad thing for a leader, because the leader can do it. Jesus could have done it himself, by himself, and been the only one basically learning from it and just shown the disciples, but instead he brought them into it. And that's part of what makes a good leader and why Jesus is such a good leader and why he leads us in our life, because he goes, I don't want you just to see it. I want you to be a part of it. I want you to experience it. I want you to see what it's like and be a part of the solution, basically. Which is just a really cool aspect of it. Like, and it's a good thing. It's not something to be ashamed of that you're delegating tasks. It's not a bad thing that you're like, that other people are able to use the talents that have been given to them and use the gifts that have been given to them and being able to achieve something and be a part of something. It's a good thing that there is. Actually, they should be, because otherwise they're just going to sit there and wait. But it says that the people ate and were satisfied. They collected 7 baskets of leftover pieces, right? God's number right there. And then immediately they get into the boat with his disciples and went to the district of Dalmanutha. Right? So Jesus does all this stuff. They said serving, and then he says, we're not done, guys. Let's go. And so that's another big thing of like, immediately. So even though they're tired, even though they've literally been doing this for 3 days, right? I'm sure they're exhausted, they're tired, they have probably slept super well, like they've been going through all this, and now Jesus is like, okay, we're not done, guys. We're gonna keep going. And so that idea of like perseverance, right? And so that's a big deal. And disciples, I'm sure, were kind of like, okay. I'm sure they were like, all right, here we go again. And so that was that kind of section, right? This next section, the leaven of the Pharisees and Herod is what this one is called in my Bible. So the next image that we get is Jesus is talking to people, and the Pharisees are there, and they're here to cause problems. They're arguing, and they are saying they demand of him a sign from heaven to test him. Basically, the Pharisees are like, we don't fully believe you. We need more proof. And then it says, sighing deeply in his spirit, he said, why does this generation demand a sign? Truly I tell you, no sign will be given to this generation. This is an important aspect because we need to remember the fact that the Pharisees are Jewish leaders, right? Throughout the entirety of the Old Testament, we are constantly reminded of the fact that God is consistently over and over and over again through prophets and different folks and just different events that God is working miracles. There are sign after sign after sign, the entirety of the success and the livelihood, the existence of the Israelite people who come from Abraham and then Isaac and Jacob, all is literally a sign of God's presence and existence, right? Abraham was an old man. Sarah was infertile. There was no reason why the Israelite people should exist, why the Jewish people should exist, and yet God made it a thing. And so basically, and the Pharisees have a lot of knowledge of this. They've seen over and over and over again and they're knowledgeable about everything that God has done. And not only that, but now you had 4,000 people, right? Talk about feeding 4,000, and then you had the feeding the 5,000. You have people know about Jesus is doing something. You also remember Jesus isn't traveling like a crazy amount of space. He wasn't going all around the world. That was not what he was doing. He set that out for the disciples and the rest of the apostles, and he set that out for that was going to be other people's mission work. That's our mission work as believers in the future, right? Sharing the gospel around the world. But Jesus said, that's not where my focus is going to be. These are tight-knit communities. People know that this Jesus guy is doing stuff because he's making a scene. Jesus isn't just sitting being like quiet in little rooms. Like, people can't help but share the gospel. They can't help but share Jesus doing things. And yet here the Pharisees, once again, just like the Israelites in the past had done, which I mean is understandable. Pharisees are people. A lot of times they get this rap of like they're evil, and it's very understandable that like these are just dudes who want to understand. They're knowledgeable, but they just aren't seeing the full truth, right? It's easy to back, but like you have people who have one belief, who are very strict on these beliefs, who are very legalistic, who have one view of how life should be lived, and now their boat is completely getting rocked. But at this point, Jesus does something very different from a lot of the rest of the times, right? He rebukes them, and he tells them, truly I tell you, no sign will be given to this generation. Then he left them, got in the boat, and went to the other side. So this is kind of his lesson to these specific people. Now we don't know the situation that was going on with these specific Pharisees. It's very possible that these were the Pharisees that they have literally seen. It's very possible that they have they may have or they may not have seen signs in other places. They may have heard the stories. It's very possible. That's kind of my interpretation, but that could be very wrong. I don't know the stories of these people specifically. All we have is the information that's given to us. And so basically Jesus, he goes to these people they have knowledge of what God's been doing, and they also have stories of what's been happening. of what Jesus has been doing. They came and began to argue with him, demanding a sign from heaven to test him. Meaning, I mean, that kind of tells you already. They know that something's going on here. They know of Jesus. It's not just they didn't know and they wanted to listen to him, but that they're testing him. They know that things have been happening and they just want an extra proof. They want that extra little bit. They want that extra little bit. And so Jesus goes, no, I've already proved. Basically, do I have to prove myself to you before you can believe me? Are you really going to basically kind of like, what are you talking about? Why are you guys, like, you've seen that there's proof. Why do you need more? At what point is it going to be enough, basically, is what he's saying. At what point is it going to be enough for you to start trusting me? Which connects exactly into the next section of the same passage of when they're on the boat. The disciples have one loaf of bread because they didn't bring enough bread, right, for 12 dudes. They brought one loaf of bread, probably not going to be enough. And Jesus, I didn't even read this part. Disciples had forgotten to take bread and only one loaf with them. Then he gave them strict orders. Watch out, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. So he's telling them, basically, remember what just happened, okay? Let's remember what the situation. This is Jesus doing a teaching moment, saying, okay, you guys are getting, I know you guys are hungry, I know you're tired and you're frustrated, but you gotta remember, you gotta see what, you don't want to be like the Pharisees, basically, like, you just saw what happened to those guys, what I did, I tried to show them, they didn't want to, so we just left. They don't deserve to, they've made their choice that they don't want to listen. They just want to hear what they want to hear, they just want to see what they want to see. Instead of being willing to actually listen, they're just going to ignore everything. And then Jesus uses this moment of them complaining, of them doing the same thing, of basically, why are you discussing the fact that you have no bread? So that gives us context of the fact that the guys now are talking about it, they're complaining about it. Don't you understand or comprehend? Do you have hardened hearts? Do you remember eyes? Do you have eyes and not see? Do you have ears and not hear? Do you not remember when I broke the 5 loaves for 5,000? How many baskets full of leftovers did you collect? 12, they told him. When I broke 7 loaves for the 4,000, how many full of pieces did you collect? 7. And he said to them, don't you understand yet? So this goes into exactly what he's talking about. He goes, have what I've already shown you not enough? He's going, you were a part. Back to that part of like where he's teaching them, where they're a part of the solution. They're a part of sharing the gospel. They're a part of sharing the food, right? They're a part of it. This was a sign from God. And now the disciples are forgetting. Spiritual amnesia, right? They're forgetting what God has done. And so he goes, do you remember? Do you remember what just happened? And they go, oh. And then think about the numbers that are associated with that, right? Because numbers are important. How many baskets full of leftovers? 12. So Jesus is going to provide for each of them. Each one of them, God is going to provide for. Not just a few of them. They're not going to have to share. They're going to be fully taken care of. And then when he says, I broke 7 loaves for 4,000. What is 7? One of God's holy numbers, right? God has a whole bunch of numbers that are his favorites. And it's because God made numbers, so he can choose as many as he wants. But 7, again, is the idea of fullness, of wholeness, right? It's one of those numbers. I want to say 12 is too, but I don't. 12 also, I mean, there's a whole bunch of. I feel like numbers, there's a whole bunch of just like different numbers that God uses to just show like his fullness. But 7 and 12 are 2 of those, right? The whole week, and with 7, and then with the 12 being the 12 tribes and the 12 people and the 12 disciples and 144, which is 12 by 12, and yeah. Anyways, there's a whole bunch of that. But yeah, him choosing like basically saying, "I'm gonna take care of you guys. Don't forget that. I know you're frustrated. I know you're irritated. I know you're starving. You're 12 young dudes who are probably starving, who've been traveling around and doing great, and I love you guys for that. And you guys, there's a purpose in this, but you can't be forgetting that you can't be forgetting what God's done. You got to be thankful for what God's done, and got to hold on to those promises of what's to come. So I guess that's kind of just it's just a big teaching moment, and it's understandable because guess what? I would have been the same. I would have been just like the disciples. I would have been like, "Hey, yo, I'm starving. I'm hungry all the time," and so I fully understand. I would have been like, "Can't you? I'm hungry," and being like, "You're gonna survive. You're not going to die. You're gonna be okay. I've got you." So kind of this continuation of like Jesus basically talking about like there are people sometimes who are willing to listen, people who are willing to help, people who reach out to him. That there are people who reach out to God and Jesus blesses them, right? But then at the same time, there are people who aren't, and sometimes we have to, and that is also a learning experience. So, healing a blind man. So there's a blind man. Jesus takes the man out of the village. It's the same thing. He does the same thing with a deaf man. I don't know if it's chapter 7 or 6. Maybe it's miraculous healings. Walking on water, feeding 5,000. John the Baptist, rejection of Nazareth. Maybe it is earlier. Ooh, maybe it's way earlier. I'm trying to find it, but Jesus does pretty much the same exact thing with a deaf and mute man. Right? Yeah, here we go. When he entered, right? He does the same thing, right? He takes the people out and he heals them. He kind of separates them. He takes them individually. So God comes to him. Jesus comes to them individually, right? And so there's this healing moment. They're connected, right? But in this instance, and Jesus regularly tells people not to necessarily talk about stuff. However, people don't listen to that. They start sharing the gospel, right? We see it with the woman at the well. We see it with a whole bunch of different people who Jesus tells like, keep this between us. Or the one man, he says, go to the temple and do all the regular rituals. And do that. But this time, Jesus just straight up says, don't even go to the village. Basically, he heals this man. This man had faith and was begging him and goes, I believe you and I trust you. And Jesus says, yeah, then come along. But then he says, don't even go into the village. Basically, kind of a continuation of the last couple of things, which is like basically sometimes people aren't going to listen. That the people that we got to hear the message of the word, but you got to have people who are willing to listen. Sometimes when you sow seeds, they don't grow. And it's not necessarily because out of a lack of love. It's just right now, this kind of thing, this situation, this is not, they won't be shown it. This is between you and me. This is a moment for you to grow with me. This is something that I can keep between you and me in our hearts. Right? This man can remember that. He can hold on to that. He can use that as faith. But that's what it is. It's a personal moment between the two of them, and other people may not be willing to listen. And you talk about the things about the Pharisees. Basically, the Pharisees wanted a sign. They wanted an example, and him healing the blind man is him saying, "I'm not going to show them. they don't want to see what God is doing, because all they want to do is prove that they're right. They're not trying to see God. Their hearts aren't in the right place. So them seeing this, they're not even going to believe it. They're just going to go, "Oh, you're just making that up again," and Jesus is coming up with this fake thing, and this man wasn't really blind, and or maybe he had his sight healed some other way, or all sorts of stuff, like maybe he's just lying, stuff like that, where it's like basically it's their hearts aren't ready to hear the truth, and their hearts aren't seeing what God is doing and what Jesus is doing. So this is going to stay between us, which is kind of a sad thing. But it's true is that sometimes people are so clouded in their own darkness that they want to create their own ideas of who God is and what God has done, and they don't want to see the truth. And all of us do it, right? We lie to ourselves, and I lie to myself. I know a lot of my life I've lied to myself about how people perceive me, about being like, oh, am I too weak, or am I unlikable, or I think I'm better than other people because I'm smart, or because I'm capable, or because look better, or stuff like that. And it's like that's not how God sees us, and that's not the right way of living. Or me being like, oh, because I don't cuss or something, or because I don't drink, or I don't whatever, I don't hook up with people, or I don't, that makes me a better person. And that's not true. It's like sometimes if you're not willing to hear the truth, then the truth, it's a seed that will get choked out or burned. And so that's kind of what he's talking about, is like they don't want to hear this, but I'm willing to help you. But Jesus is still respecting that the man had faith. So the man who's alone, he's saying, I'm still with you, guy. Trust me. I'm still with you. I'm still showing you that I love you. I haven't given up on you. It's just that right now some other people don't want to hear the truth, and that it may cause problems. And that all it's going to do is create hassle. So we're going to just keep this. And sometimes that happens, like certain things just at a certain time. It's like you're gonna grow in your faith, or you're gonna change. And that sometimes other people can't see that, or other people aren't going to see it for what it is. And that doesn't mean that they will never see the truth, that they'll never find out the good things. It just means at that moment, right? This is written down for history. It didn't keep silent, right? This isn't something that got kept hidden for history. It was just at that moment. This wasn't something that was meant to be shared. This wasn't something that was going on. So, yeah. Then this one's just huge. Peter's confession of the Messiah. Jesus asks him, "Who do you think I am?" People are like, well, people are saying that you're Elijah, John the Baptist, that you're a prophet. So, they're basically saying, people are talking. People are trying to figure out. And then Peter answers. No, but Jesus asks them a very direct question and says, "But you, who do you say I am?" And Peter goes, "You're the Messiah." And Jesus tells them he strictly warned them to tell no one about him. So again, this goes into that whole finding the truth. At least this is how I'm perceiving it. This is kind of my interpretation of the day. Is Jesus going, you're seeing the truth, basically. Of Jesus, he's like, when you start to see the truth, then you start to see the truth. When you're willing to accept and see, oh, what I was doing was wrong. Let me see what the truth behind everything is. That's when you can accept that Jesus is who he says he is. When instead of putting all these ideas of going, maybe he's John the Baptist, maybe he's Elijah, maybe a prophet. So they're people are trying to figure it out, and it's like they aren't fully understanding yet, but they're getting somewhere, right? They're not complete. They're not. It's not like they're on the wrong train. It's just that they're not fully on the right one either, right? People are trying to figure out who Jesus is. They're trying to understand, but they just don't quite have it yet, right? They don't have it. They just don't see it. They don't see the whole truth. They kind of want to, right? They're choosing a prophet, Elijah, John the Baptist. Like they're seeing that there's some kind of connection, some kind of correlation between the fact that God is involved. They're seeing that God is involved somehow. They're just not seeing that it's God with them. And then Peter is like, yeah, he is. But Jesus at this point in time is like, okay, you know the truth. Right now is not the time when this will be proclaimed. He's basically saying, wait, be patient. Of some other stuff has got to happen, which he talks about in the next section, right? He talks about the fact that it's necessary for the Son of Man to suffer many things, be rejected by elders, chief priests, scribes, be killed, and rise from 3 days. And then, right then, Peter gets mad and is like, don't basically, bad stuff shouldn't happen to you. Don't talk about yourself like that. And then Jesus is like, bruh, I know you're worried about like, I'm your friend. He says, you're not thinking about God's concerns, but human concerns. Like, you're worried about the situation at hand that you can see. You're not worried about the big picture here. You're not worried about what God's doing. You're worried about, you could lose your friend, or your friend is talking about something very scary. It's scary to talk about, losing a friend, but your friend dying and being in suffering and going through awful things. And Peter's like, I don't want to imagine that. You're my friend. I can't imagine having something awful happening to you. I'm devoting my entire life to you. I don't want something awful to happen to you. And Jesus is like, it has to happen. But again, it goes back to that part that, like, it's not happening yet. And we have to be patient, right? This stuff has to be fulfilled. So regardless if you want to accept it or not, it is the truth, and it's going to happen. Eventually, you'll understand that, but right now you don't. So that's kind of just a cool... All of these are basically about, like, a lot of patience and a lot of, like, accepting the truth when it happens versus... beforehand, accepting the truth and accepting it in different roads and yeah, and I think you're figuring out what I'm kind of talking about. And then the last piece of this section, I've been talking a long time, is it says, taking up your cross. If anyone wants to follow me, let him deny himself, take up the cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it. Whoever loses his life because of me and the gospel will save it. For what does it benefit someone to gain the whole world and yet to lose his life? What can anyone get in exchange for his life? For example, who is ashamed of me, my words, in this adulterous and sinful generation? The Son of Man will also be ashamed of him when he comes in the glory of his Father with his holy angels. So this is another hard truth. This is another big truth that Jesus is putting on him, but it's kind of that it's true. The idea of taking up your cross. The idea that, like, in choosing Jesus, in choosing life, in choosing light, you're going to have some difficulties, right? You want to save your life, you're going to lose it. But whoever loses his life because of me and the gospel will save it. And so, obviously, at that point in time, they're like, Jesus talks in parables for a reason. And he talks in these kind of phrases for a reason. It's so that people who are listening and willing to think on it, at least partially, the reason why is so that people can, like, you have to think on it. That it's bigger than you. It's not something that's just explicitly said. But it's told to you so that you can go, okay, he's saying something important. I don't fully understand it. I don't fully get what it is, but I'm going to think about it, and I'm going to I want to know what Jesus is trying to tell me. Seeking out Jesus and seeking out what he's trying to teach you and taking that time to do so. I think that's part of why he talks a lot of times in these, like, very complicated ways and talks in parables and does that. Because it makes it makes people who are proud and think that they can understand everything really easily and that they don't have to spend time understanding, that they can just get it and that's enough. But we have to be willing to seek God. We have to be willing to deny ourselves this idea that we know everything, and follow. And so that part about whoever wants to save his life is going to lose it. So basically, the life you think you're going to have, the plans you're making, all the things that you want, you kind of got to lose it. Kind of got to say, I'm going to throw it away, which kind of sucks sometimes. right? Friends, family, having a good time sometimes, doing everything that you want to do, being lazy, you know, all those kind of things that you gotta, that if you're gonna follow him, if you want, and it says whoever wants to save his life. So if you want to have the truth, if you want to live with God, if you want to be with Jesus forever, and you want to follow him, you gotta be willing to say, okay, well, I guess we'll give it up. But then it kind of takes another turn and says, but whoever loses life because of me and the gospel will save it. So saying like, yeah, it's gonna suck for now a little bit. There's gonna be some stuff that's gonna be a little rough. But in the end, it's gonna be okay. So like the instant gratification right now, the stuff that you want right now, yeah, you're gonna have to kind of give it up, but you're gonna end up saving your life. And so it says, and then it says, for what does it benefit someone to gain the whole world and yet lose his life? This reminds me of Ecclesiastes, where Solomon's basically like, what is the point of life if all we're doing is serving ourselves? If everything is basically for ourselves, then we have literally nothing. And he kind of has an existential crisis. But that's kind of basically what he's saying. He's like, at the end of your life, you're gonna go down to the ground. You're dead. So, what is the point? He's asking kind of the big question of like, so what do you believe is gonna happen when it's all over? What are you gonna gain? What do you gain in exchange for your life? Who's this? Like, what's the point? Do you believe there's something bigger, or do you believe that whatever you had, that was it? That whatever impact you made, that's he's asking the big question of like, what do you believe? Basically, what do you believe is the purpose of all this? And then it goes into, forever ashamed of me, my words in this adulterous and sinful nation, the Son of Man will also be ashamed of him when he comes to the glory of the Father with the holy angels. And that's the big one that says, basically, if you believe in me, if you're going to follow me, you got to follow me. And if you're not going to follow me, then that was your choice, sort of thing. Of like, he's kind of laying it out there, saying like, what I'm doing here has a purpose, and it's for you. But if you're not willing to do what I ask, if you're not willing to say, okay, if you're not willing to take that extra step and say, okay, and you want to just keep holding on, then there's nothing I can do. Like, basically, it's up to you. Here's the gift. Here's the option. This is kind of the situation. This is the narrow door you can go through, right? This is what life can be like. And there's a great reward at the end and during the time. Like, yeah, it may be hard at times, but it also is something beautiful, and greater than you can imagine. But you got to make that choice, because at the end of the day, it's up to you. Either you're with me or you're not, and there's a consequence. There's positive consequences for being with him, and then there's a ultimate negative consequence for not. And so it's a tough one. That's a tough and heavy hitter, but it is true that like it also should encourage us to talk about the gospel, right? To say, you know what, I'm gonna be proud of my faith, because guess what? That's what I want. I want to follow Jesus. I want to have that life, and so I have to be willing to stand up and say, hey, yeah, I'm proud of my faith. I'm proud of who Jesus is. That it was a free gift, and I didn't deserve it, and God didn't have to give it to me, but he's chosen to, and so I want to share that, and I want to be proud of it, and I want to, it's something amazing. It's better than amazing. It's I almost just said it's better. It's super dope. That's it's super dope, bro. But yeah, I mean, that's part of it. It's like there's something great, but it does mean it costs something great, which is its own kind of battle, and that's a whole other discussion. But yeah, so that's kind of what I went through today. Hopefully that was kind of insightful, maybe interesting, If that's not what you got out of that, then that's not what you got out of it. But that's what I got out of it. So hopefully you have a beautiful day. Have a lovely time.